and went and went on until the mid-1960s. With this split, North Korea found itself in a peculiar position that was able to take advantage of the split and side not with the USSR and China, but staying kind of in the middle and being able to take advantage of the help and the support of both the USSR and China. So this is the first characteristic of this more independent foreign policy. And another external factor that is very important is the emergence of post-colonial states in the 1950s and the emergence of the non-aligned movement. So North Korea started to move toward this more independent foreign policy that was more independent from both blocs. Of course, North Korea was in opposition to the Western bloc led by the United States, but it also started to be not in opposition, but more independent also from the socialist bloc led by the Soviet Union. We can see also internal factors, domestic factors that led North Korea toward this different interpretation of foreign policy. First of all, I want to emphasize a very important characteristic of the very identity of North Korean regime. That is the legacy of this anti-imperialist and revolutionary struggle. We always have to keep in mind that North Korea emerged as a new state from a colonial period. So also North Korea is a post-colonial state because the Korean Peninsula was colonized for 35 years by the Japanese Empire. So this idea of being a revolutionary state that fight against colonialism and against anti-imperialism is a very important feature of the identity of the regime. That we can see this from the very beginning against the colonialism of Japan, but also during the Korean War as that was considered as this struggle against the American imperialism. So this is a very important characteristic of the regime, and in some way it's very close to some of the principles and values of the non-aligned movement, even in the period before North Korea joined the non-aligned movement. And the second domestic characteristic that I want to emphasize is the ideology that was created within North Korea starting in the 1950s. So with a very famous speech in 1955, Kim Il-sung, the leader of North Korea, proposed this new ideology that he called Juche. This ideology is based on independence and self-reliance. So these two key words of the new ideology, we can see very close to many, many ideas and principles of the non-aligned movement. And a clear example of this is the opposition of North Korea toward the stationing of foreign troops on the peninsula. And in this case, I'm talking specifically about the stationing of American troops on the southern part of the peninsula. This was a key point for North Korea, and this was also a very important point for the non-aligned movement. For example, in the Conference of Head of State in Lusaka in 1970, the non-aligned movement clearly stated that the stationing of foreign troops on the Korean Peninsula was a very big problem for the independence of foreign policy of North and South Korea. So these two very important domestic determinants led us to understand better why North Korea was so close to some of the principle of the non-aligned movement, even if it was not part of that, because we're talking about the late 50s, early 60s in this specific moment. And the last factor that I want to emphasize is an inter-Korean determinant. That means that the fact that we have two Korean states, independent Korean states, North Korea and South Korea, led to a battle for legitimacy and international recognition between North and South Korea. So North Korea started to engage diplomatically other countries in order to gain international recognition as the only legitimate representative of the Korean people, in opposition to South Korea, of course. So with all this situation in mind, we can see that the fact that North Korea was formally aligned with the Soviet bloc is true because we have the alliances, but at the same time, it promoted a more independent position in its foreign policy. If we take a step forward, we can see that this idea of expanding its foreign policy and especially its diplomatic engagement started in the 1960s, especially towards newly independent countries in Africa and Asia. And in the 1970s, it reached its highest diplomatic point. So in the 1970s, North Korea was very, very active in terms of engaging other countries from the diplomatic perspective. We can see that North Korea opened new diplomatic relations with many different countries during the 70s, especially. And it also built new economic and political ties with African and Asian countries, and many of these countries were part of the non-aligned movement in this moment. North Korea also tried a diplomatic outreach toward Western countries, Western European countries, but in this case, the results were mixed or negative in general, because North Korea was able to open diplomatic relations with very few countries in Western Europe, like Portugal and Denmark, for example. And it also tried to open economic relations with Western European countries, but it was not a big success, and it was a negative outcome in this way. And the last point for this diplomatic engagement that I'm trying to outline is the fact that North Korea was admitted to several UN bodies, like the World Health Organization, for example. And even if North Korea was not part in this phase of the United Nations, it tried to do this work of lobbying at the UN General Assembly, trying to support the North Korean position at the UN General Assembly. So we can see that in the 70s, there is a very strong diplomatic engagement by North Korea toward the rest of the world. And very briefly, I want to show you this map, just to give you a very quick idea of what I'm talking about. As you can see, the very dark green shadow here are the countries that opened diplomatic relations in the first phase, so 1948, 1950. As you can see, we're talking about mostly countries that were part of the socialist bloc. But if we take a look at the lighter shades of green, we can see that all these new diplomatic relations opened between the 60s and the 70s, especially during the 70s. And most of these countries were African and Asian countries that were already part of the non-aligned movement. So the 70s is really the coronation of this effort to expand its foreign policy and pursue a more independent foreign policy. And these goals were perfectly in line with some of the goals and principles of the non-aligned movement. That's one of the reasons why, as I already mentioned, in 1975, this map keeps coming out in the wrong position. Sorry about that. As I already mentioned, in August 1975, North Korea was officially admitted to the non-aligned movement during the conference of the foreign minister of the movement in Lima in August 1975. This is a very important diplomatic success for North Korea. And this is one of the highest points of North Korean diplomatic engagement in the 1970s. And in addition to this, we also have to notice that at the same time, the application of South Korea to join the movement was rejected. So this is represent an even more important fact for the North Korean diplomatic system, because they were admitted and South Korea was not. So in this case, we can see that this very important effort to engage the international community at large, especially African and Asian countries, really worked well in the 1970s for North Korea. As I already mentioned, North Korea and the movement had some principles, values, and goals that they share some principles, values, and goals. As I already mentioned, I talked about the stationing of foreign troops on the Korean Peninsula. That was a very important goal, the fact that all foreign troops had to be withdrawn from the peninsula. It was a long-term goal of North Korea, and it was also one of the goals that was explained by the movement, as I mentioned, in 1970 and again 1973 and in 1976, for example. The non-aligned movement repeatedly asked for the removal of foreign troops from the peninsula. Okay, so when North Korea joined the non-aligned movement, it was already in line with a lot of the strategies and goals. After North Korea joined, it obviously pursued its own national interests also within the movement. And in particular, North Korea was able to put forward two important declarations that supported its position and were endorsed by all the, not all, but most of the countries that were part of the non-aligned movement in 1976 and 1979. This period from 1975 to the early 80s represent the period in which North Korea was mostly active within the movement. It never achieved a real leadership role. It was one of the goals of Kim Il-sung. We can see this in many documents that the North Korean leadership put out during this period. The fact that Kim Il-sung wanted to achieve this role as a leader in the non-aligned movement. But if we take a look at what happened, it really never materialized this goal of being a leader in the movement. Apart from that, in this period from the 75 to the early 80s, North Korea was able to promote its position, as I already said, and also to play a role in the activities of the movement. I listed here a few things like the admission to the Coordinating Bureau in 1979, or the fact that North Korea hosted some high-profile meetings of the movement in the early 1980s. So North Korea in this period did not achieve a leadership role, but it was very active in the movement. This activism, this engagement started to slow down in the second half of the 1980s. And we can see that it completely disappeared after the end of the Cold War. So this is the period where independence and diplomatic engagement for North Korea was at its highest point, okay? And the admission at NAM really is a very good example of that. As I mentioned, I want to focus for like this last few minutes and talk about what happened after the end of the Cold War. Because the end of the Cold War is a very crucial moment. It is a key moment for North Korea. North Korea depended strongly from the help of the Soviet Union, especially in material terms, because Soviet Union provided energy assistance, provided loans at a very good rate to North Korea. So the fact that suddenly the Soviet Union and the entire bloc around the Soviet Union disappeared represented a very calamitous event for North Korea that led to a series of crises, not only one single crisis. It led to an economic crisis. It led to a security crisis, because suddenly North Korea was not protected anymore by the Soviet nuclear umbrella that protected North Korea from possible attacks from the United States, for example. And also to a legitimacy crisis, because the economic crisis, the security crisis, and the fact that Kim Il-sung died in 1994 represented also a very dangerous problem for the stability and legitimacy of the regime. So these are the reasons why the end of the Cold War is such a key moment for North Korea, both from the domestic perspective and from the international perspective. If we focus on the international perspective, we can see that in the 1990s, we are in the so-called unipolar era with the United States as the only remaining superpower. And this was very problematic for North Korea, because North Korea, at the time and still today, is still at war with the United States. After the Korean War, when the Korean War ended in 1953, the United States, China, and North Korea signed an armistice, not a peace treaty. So North Korea is still at war formally with the United States. So in the 1990s, North Korea found itself in an international situation in which the only remaining superpower was its worst enemy, and it did not have any protection from other powerful allies like the Soviet Union was. So in this situation, the response of the regime to this series of crises was to develop nuclear weapons and to focus on the military in the domestic perspective, okay? And they launched the so-called Songun Chongchi, that is a new policy line that focused on the military, supporting the military on the domestic perspective. But most importantly is the development of nuclear weapons. North Korea decided that developing an independent nuclear deterrent to preserve the regime against possible attacks from the outside, that it meant from the United States, was the #1 priority of the regime. And this had consequences, because non-proliferation is a very important issue for the international community and also for the non-aligned movement. So breaching the non-proliferation treaty, of which North Korea was part since 1985, represented a very important shift of North Korean foreign policy and led to more isolation in the international community for North Korea. As we all know today, North Korea is a very isolated country in the international community. It's not cut out from relations with other countries, but it's still very isolated. And this isolation started with the end of the Cold War and the start of the nuclear program in the country. the two key moments for the nuclear programs probably are the first and the second nuclear crisis. The first is 1993, 1994, and the second one is between 2002 and 2004. These two crises are different, especially in the way the international community addressed these two crises. For the first one, it was partially solved at the time through a bilateral agreement between US and North Korea. As you can clearly see, in this moment, the mid-1990s, the US was the only remaining superpower. And it was able to, in a way, try to address this issue on its own.
Marco, your time is expiring.
Okay, 2 minutes.
Sorry.
No problem. So the first nuclear crisis was addressed bilaterally by US and North Korea. The second nuclear crisis, when North Korea withdrew from the Non-Proliferation Treaty, was addressed in a multilateral way through the six-party talks. And this is a very important distinction to make, because in the first phase, we have the United States alone. In the second phase, we have a multilateral framework that tried to address this issue. In any case, when North Korea started to test nuclear weapons in 2006, this led to international condemnation, and this turned into a confrontation between North Korea and the United States. So very quickly, the non-aligned movement condemns nuclear proliferation, and it condemned North Korean nuclear proliferation. But at the same time, it was very critical of the action of the United States, of the confrontational attitude of the United States against North Korea. I'm pointing this out, and I'm concluding with the last slide, because North Korea is still part of the non-aligned movement, even if it's not very active. And this membership is a very important example of how North Korea can still be engaged diplomatically from the international community. And the fact that the non-aligned movement has a very critical position toward the United States, also in this situation, means that this movement can represent an important instrument to provide new avenues for dialogue and for engagement with North Korea. In this way, we can reduce the international isolation in which North Korea found itself today, and maybe find new ways for dialogue and solution also for the nuclear crisis. So I think I can stop here. I hope I didn't take too much time, and thank you very much to everyone for listening.
Thank you, Marco. So now we have two people lost nowhere. One is Ziad, who I sent again the link to Ziad, but I don't know if he sees the email. So if you want to call him again, Noha, and tell him that I sent him again the links.
I don't understand.
And then now I see that Professor Anwar is there, and even Ali Mohaghegh, sorry if I pronounce
Ziad is coming. I see him in the waiting room.
Sorry?
They are still waiting. Ils attendent, ils t'ont envoyé un message.
Ziad is coming. I see him in the waiting room.
Okay. Who has to admit?
It's okay, it's okay. He's entering on Zoom, okay? Okay, yeah, no.
So if you agree, I propose, Nisar, tell me if you agree. Ziad, if you can enter soon, can start, and then Professor Anwar, and then Professor Mohaghegh.
So Professor Anwar is here, so we can start with Professor Anwar.
Then we can start. We can do it the other way around. Start with Pakistan, Iran, and then Palestine. Okay.
Right.
Okay then. Professor Ziad Anwar. Sorry if you want to start.
Okay.
If you want just to briefly introduce yourself, please.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Marzia and Professor Nisar. I am Professor Zahid Anwar, Professor of Political Science at the University of Peshawar, Pakistan. I did PhD in Political Science in 1994, and then postdoctoral research from Columbia University, USA. I hold MA degree in philosophy, and MA degree in history, beside PhD in political science. For the last 30 years, I'm teaching social sciences, particularly political science, to my graduate and postgraduate students. I did a diploma in conflict resolution from Uppsala University, Sweden, and good governance diploma from Central European University. I have published about 40 research papers, and I authored a book on South Asia. So this is just a brief information about my academic background and experience. With your permission, I would like just to present my paper. First of all, I'm thankful to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts on the rise of Asia in this conference on Pakistan role in non-aligned movement. I'm thankful to the organizers and particularly to the co-chairs, Dr. Marzia and Professor Nisar. It's an honor indeed to share my thoughts on the issue with distinguished scholars.
Hi, Ziad. Hi.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. So,
Professor Zahid, please take 20 to 25 minutes for your presentation.
Okay,
No
I
problem.
will take less than that, Professor.
Okay,
Nisar, don't worry. So, okay, so nice of you for reminding me about the time constraints. So, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished scholar, non-aligned movement came into existence when the world was divided into two blocks, two political blocks, and it was a Cold War, and that time the two superpowers, and that point in time, during that period, developing countries were passing through a very crucial period in their history. The establishment and the foundation of non-aligned movement provided space to developing countries for exposure. It was an excellent forum for developing countries where they got opportunity to share their aspirations and longings and inspiration. NAM was a good forum for developing countries. It was founded in 1961 on the foundation of 10 principles devised in Bandung Conference, Indonesia in 1955. Those 10 principles I would briefly talk about are still valid, still important. We see there is no Cold War now, but the principle on which non-aligned movement was established, those principles are still important. I will just briefly mention those principles. Number one principle was respect for fundamental human rights. Number two, respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity of all nations. Number three, recognition of the movements for national independence. Number four, recognition of the equality of all races and of the equality of all nations, large and small. Number five, abstention from intervention or interference in the internal affairs of another country. Number six principle, respect for the right of each nation to defend itself singly or collectively in conformity with the Charter of the United Nations. Distinguished scholars, another principle was refraining from acts or threats of aggression or the use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any country. Number eight, settlement of all international disputes by peaceful means in conformity with the Charter of the United Nations. Number 9, promotion of mutual interest and cooperation. Number 10, respect for justice and international obligations. These were the foundation of non-aligned movement. Ladies and gentlemen, these principles inspired developing nations to struggle for political and economic independence. The non-aligned movement stood against colonialism, new colonialism, racial discrimination, hegemony, occupation, interference, exploitation, foreign aggression, imperialism, domination, and bloc politics. Another point I would like to share is the Afro-Asian society faced, almost all of them face these problems I just mentioned, like colonialism, racial discrimination, in one way or the other. Distinguished scholar Nam became voice of the economically underdeveloped and marginalized global South. It stood for South-South cooperation and considered economic underdevelopment and social injustices threat to peace and security. Non-aligned movement supports sustainable development, and it considers debt burden, globalization, lack of democratic decision making in global political and economic order, unfair trade practices, decline in foreign aid, and donor conditionality obstacles in the development of developing countries, particularly non-aligned movement members. Non-aligned movement stands for cultural diversity and universality of human rights. In this frame, I would like to discuss Pakistan's role. Pakistan played an active role in non-aligned movement since its very inception and became its member in 1979 in its Havana summit. Why? NAN came into being in 1961, but Pakistan became its member in 1979 because during the Cold War, Pakistan was a member of CETO and CENTO, and that was a big obstacle, hurdle, hindrance to become member of non-aligned movement. The Bandung Conference, which took place in 1955, brought Pakistan and China near each other and provided basis for the all-weather friendship between the two countries. Pakistan fully supported non-aligned movement on peaceful settlement of disputes, nuclear issue, expansion of UN Security Council, terrorism, self-determination, and economic issues. There is convergence of interest. Pakistan supported Pakistan viewpoint on these issues and non-aligned movement viewpoint on these issues. They were in tune. There was convergence. Pakistan now would like to see non-aligned movement play an increasingly effective role in all international organizations or forums like United Nations. Ladies and gentlemen, to find its due place, non-aligned movement members require forging closer trade links and galvanizing cooperation among them. There is no Cold War now, but still it can be, NAM can be a very effective forum organization if the NAM member forge closer trade links and strengthen cooperation. Non-aligned movement members are rich in natural and human resources, skills, talent, and also have the necessary technological base and an unparalleled market of their own. Better and closer cooperation will help them to address their problems, whether they are economic, social, or political. harnessing their own resources and capitalizing on their overall potential will help a lot these developing countries in the global south. South Asia is an important region of Asia. Nevertheless, it is victim of poverty. It is victim of violence due to unresolved disputes and unaddressed historical grievances. These are some obstacle which is stopping or which is not allowing South Asian countries to collectively address their problems, whether these problems are related to poverty or illiteracy or violence. Distinguished scholars, NAM stands for cherished principles agreed upon in Bandung Conference, and irrespective of the fact whether the word is bipolar or unipolar or multipolar, the NAM struggle for its achievement will be a worth appreciation effort. There is time. Now it's a need of the hour that the developing countries, the global south, are the member of NAM focus and give more attention to win-win situation rather than zero-sum game. There is much violence in the world. There is illiteracy, there is poverty, and collective effort of the NAM members will help them to address these problems. So these are my some random thoughts I would like to share with you. Once again, I'm thankful to the organizers to honor me, to give me time to share my points of main points of my paper with this August House. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Anwar. Now Ziad also could join. Nice meeting you, Ziad.
Yes.
And what shall we do, Nisar? Shall we go ahead with the other South Asian, because also she was there. Aisha Siriwardhane was there, but now she disappeared again.
I think you can give it to Palestinian.
Okay,
because he is
he has struggled to join. So please, Ziad. So but he will speak in French. I don't know, Nisar, do you understand French?
No, I don't. Sorry.
I know. Then how can we manage, Noha? Can you translate a little bit what Ziad says in English once in a while?
He will say,
okay. I can speak in French and you give a summary in English in 5 minutes. Okay. You understand Marzia French?
I can understand French, but I'm not so familiar with French.
My colleague Noha in Jordan, she speaks French and English.
Well,
because you are in university or French, you have. Yeah, and I am teaching in French language. I am teacher in France.
I know that you teach French.
Can we speak now 10 minutes in French and can we summary in 5 minutes in English?
But Ziad, your English is very good. So why don't you speak in English?
Yeah.
I prefer speak in French, but
no, we don't mind about that. I think also that it's your English is quite good. And if sometimes you don't know how to express yourself.
I speak in French for communication, for intervention, and Noha can give 5 minutes and summary.
Interpret, yeah.
Okay.
It is up to you. Yeah.
Vous faites des efforts pour comprendre. Noha, vous êtes avec nous, Noha? Noha's
mic is off, I think.
Yeah, you should turn on you switch on, please, the microphone, Noha. Microphone.
Noha, vous cliquez sur le mic. Il faut activer le son, mon Noha. C'est pas grave. Noha,
Noha, please. Yeah. No, she.
and Marzia, you understand the French, Marzia?
Yes, I can understand. I'm not sure. I don't speak. I can't say I speak French. I've never studied French.
No problem. I come my intervention in French and Noha, vous êtes avec nous, Noha?
I think
Oui,
no problem. You can speak in French, but
Yeah.
Marzia can explain in 2-3 minutes what you have.
I
spoken.
I will explain
Noha,
because
Noha.
she speaks,
Okay,
she
Noha.
speaks French.
Merci
Okay.
beaucoup, Noha. Donc, je vais.
Can
Noha,
you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we
Yeah.
can hear you.
Okay.
Noha, je vais faire mon intervention en français. Après, tu vas dire 5 minutes un résumé en anglais pour le public, d'accord?
You have about
Merci beaucoup.
15. You have about 15 minutes anyway.
Yeah.
Donc, je vais
Because
parler 15
I
minutes.
want also to comment. I will comment also.
Then
And,
we may take some more time
Pas de
then.
problème.
okay.
Okay.
D'accord. Je vais parler pendant 15 minutes. Après, Noha, elle va. Merci beaucoup. Très gentil.
Merci.
D'abord, bonjour tout le monde. Bonjour de Gaza. Donc, malgré ce problème technique. Donc, je tiens à remercier les organisateurs de ce colloque très intéressant. Merci beaucoup à mon collègue Darwish de l'Université de Havre, ma collègue Noha, vous, Marzia, Marzia, tous les membres. C'est un plaisir pour moi d'être avec vous en direct de Gaza, de la Palestine, pour parler d'un sujet très important qui s'attache. La Palestine s'attache beaucoup à c'est le mouvement de payer nos alliés. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, le thème de mon intervention, c'est 60 ans après Belgrade, la cause palestinienne entre alliance obligatoire et à la recherche de la libération. Donc, le mouvement de payer nos alliés créé en 1961 à Belgrade, pourquoi la Palestine a adhéré à ce mouvement et comment ce mouvement a considéré donc la cause palestinienne. Je vais parler des différentes conférences donc, de ces pays alliés. Donc, avant, il y avait 1955, donc bonding. Après, il y a Belgrade. Belgrade, elle a commencé avec 25 pays. Et depuis 1961, depuis la première conférence de 1961, jusqu'à le dernier en 2019, le sommet de pays et nos alliés, et la cause palestinienne était une priorité pour les différentes conférences, d'accord? Donc,
je veux que...
Non, à la fin, je te laisse à la fin. Et donc, je fais un résumé en anglais à la fin. Et donc, pour les pays et nos alliés, il y a 4 commissions. Il y a le sommet de pays et nos alliés, il y a les ministres des Affaires étrangères, il y a le groupe de mouvements représentés aux Nations Unies, et il y a la commission de Palestine au niveau de mouvements qui se compose de 12 membres de pays et nos alliés de 3 continents, l'Asie, l'Afrique et l'Amérique latine. Donc, le premier point, tous les aspects de la cause palestinienne étaient discutés dans tous les sommets. D'abord, les réfugiés palestiniens, Jérusalem comme capitale, l'État palestinien, les agressions israéliennes contre le peuple palestinien, les résolutions internationales des Nations Unies. Donc, deuxième point, quelques événements sur les relations entre la Palestine et le mouvement de nos pays et nos alliés. D'abord, le mouvement de nos alliés, elle a refusé, Israël a participé à tous les travaux de ce mouvement depuis sa création. Pourquoi? Parce qu'il considère Israël comme un état d'occupation et que parmi les chartes principales de ce mouvement, que la lutte contre l'occupation et contre la colonisation. Et pour ces pays, Israël, c'est un état colonial, c'est un état d'occupation. Donc, deuxième point, le mouvement a reconnu l'OLP comme membre permanent. Dans toutes les conférences et les sommets, il a donné la dénonciation et la colonisation. Ils ont dénoncé, c'était le premier mouvement international qui a appelé à boycotter un boycott économique et culturel d'Israël. Ils ont reconnu Jérusalem comme capitale de l'État de la Palestine. Ils sont pour le processus de paix au Moyen-Orient. Ils sont pour le retour de réfugiés palestiniens. Ils sont pour la paix durable dans la région. Ils ont dénoncé le blocus sur Gaza depuis 14 ans. Ils demandent la libération de tous les prisonniers palestiniens. Donc, on peut dire que la position de ce mouvement, c'est une position avancée, c'est un soutien inconditionnel à la cause palestinienne par rapport à la Russie, par rapport aux États-Unis, par rapport aux résolutions des Nations Unies. Donc, il y avait des avancées. C'est pour cela, voilà. Maintenant, comment ce mouvement était un grand soutien pour la cause palestinienne? Donc, c'était un soutien inconditionnel de tous les membres, donc 120 pays de membres de ce mouvement, toujours un soutien à la cause palestinienne, malgré donc la différence des divergences politiques et économiques, mais ce mouvement était un grand soutien pour la cause palestinienne à l'époque, d'accord? Ils ont poussé ce mouvement, les Nations Unies, à prendre des décisions courageuses pour dénoncer l'occupation et pour reconnaître les droits fondamentaux du peuple palestinien dans tous les domaines. Et les Palestiniens se rappellent toujours les premiers pionniers et créateurs de ce mouvement, comme l'Indien Nehru, comme le Yougoslavien Tito, comme l'Égyptien Nasser, et comme le Ghanéen Nkrumah, qui était un défenseur ardent de la cause palestinienne, considéré pour eux comme une cause nationale. Si on va faire un petit résumé pour tous les sommets, soit le premier sommet de Belgrade en 1961, le Caire en 1964, l'Osaka en Zambie en 1970, Algérie 73, Sri Lanka 76, Havre, Cuba 79, Delhi en Inde en 1981, l'Égypte en 2009, l'Iran en 2012 et Venezuela en 2016 et récemment Bakou en Azerbaïdjan en 2019. Et récemment, en février 2021, il y avait une réunion du ministre du Travail à Venezuela de pays et nos alliés. Dans tous ces sommets, il y avait un soutien à la cause palestinienne. Donc, c'était une priorité et c'était à la une, c'était la cause palestinienne, c'était un grand soutien. Voilà, voilà, ça, numéro un. Après, maintenant, la présence palestinienne, quatrièmement, la présence palestinienne à ce mouvement. En 1970, dans le sommet de l'Osaka, donc l'OLP est devenu un membre observateur. Et après, depuis la réunion de ministres des Affaires étrangères à Lima au bureau en 1975, la Palestine devient membre officiel et complet au mouvement non allié. En 1979, la Palestine était élue vice-président de ce mouvement et en 1981, en Inde, ils ont confirmé que la Palestine est devenue vice-président. Donc, ça montre un peu que la Palestine, c'était une importance pour ces pays qui considéraient la cause palestinienne comme cause de justice, comme cause nationale, d'accord? Si on va parler maintenant...
Ziad, can just we ask Noha to sum up in English
non,
what you said?
je vais finir, après il va faire un résumé en anglais, d'accord?
I hope I will remember everything.
Because it's very... I think for people who don't speak French is
voilà.
very
Allez, à toi, Noha, tu peux faire un résumé en anglais, Noha?
Oui, until now, what Ziad is saying, well, first he traces the beginning of the non-aligned movement and the main leaders that were at the beginning. And then he says that he cites most of the summits where that took place since then. I mean, in Harare, in Algiers, he cites them. So it's just chronological, you know, of all, where he says that in most of these conferences, Palestine had occupied an important place. Until the PLO was recognized as a non-state but participant in the UN, so it became a member of the non-aligned movement. I think that this is the main thrust. I mean, he's just giving a historical review of the developments in the non-aligned movement, which he believes is an important forum for Palestine. OK, bon, tu peux continuer maintenant.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Donc, je parle rapidement, après je donne le deuxième point. Donc, qu'est-ce qu'elle a fait, le mouvement de nos alliés pour la Palestine? D'abord, la création d'une commission ministérielle qui s'appelle Palestine depuis 1979 au sein du mouvement. qui sont composés de 12 pays de 3 continents, Afrique, Asie, Amérique latine. Le sommet de Venezuela en 2016, il a considéré l'année 2017, c'est l'année de la Palestine. Et donc, ça montre un peu l'importance accordée à la cause palestinienne pour ces pays. Et donc, voilà, en conclusion, on peut dire qu'en général, la cause palestinienne, il n'y avait pas de divergence sur cette cause palestinienne. Il y avait un consensus général de tous les pays, et c'était parmi les causes qui attirent tout le monde parce que c'est une cause de justice, c'est une cause d'occupation, c'est une cause de colonisation, et il y a les réfugiés, il y a les prisonniers, il y a les agresseurs israéliens. C'est pour cela que les pays jérusalémiens, ils ont considéré, et c'est parmi c'est toujours le premier point à débattre, et la cause palestinienne. Voilà. Tu peux aller, Noha.
Oui. One other thing he said, even in the previous part, was that Israel was never accepted as part of the non-aligned movement or in any of its instances, since they considered it an occupying power, and it's an extension of a colonial setup. So Israel was never accepted, whereas Palestine has always been considered an important issue, whether on the question of the return of the refugees or the settlements or the solution and the establishment of an entity, of a state entity for Palestine.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Et parmi Israël, il a considéré ce mouvement comme un ennemi à Israël. Et toujours, il considère ce mouvement comme un danger. Il a toujours accusé ce mouvement comme antisémite. Et ça, c'était dangereux parce qu'il y a des avancées. Et même, on peut dire que le mouvement, il a dépassé la Ligue arabe, la conférence islamique et les Nations unies et l'Union européenne dans ces décisions en faveur de la cause palestinienne. C'est pour cela qu'Israël était très gêné de ce mouvement et de ces décisions en faveur de la cause palestinienne.
Yeah, Ziad says that Israel has been very has considered the non-aligned movement as an enemy and as an anti-Semitic movement, since as an organization, it is ahead of many other regional organizations in its pro-Palestinian positions. It is in advance of the Arab League, of the Islamic Summit. It is definitely a forum where Palestine, and it is ahead, of course, of the United Nations, where the United States uses its veto against any resolution that is pro-Palestinian. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Ça va, Ziad? Hey.
Yeah, thank you. Good interpretation.
Les Nations Unies, c'est pas une organisation. Et c'était la seule organisation internationale. Ça montre un peu que
that it is the only international organization which works for, which can be, which is supporting the Palestinian problem.
Okay.
Donc, si on va parler aujourd'hui rapidement en conclusion, quelle est la cause palestinienne aujourd'hui alliée? Et si on va parler de la cause palestinienne, je me laisse parler, s'il te plaît, Anwar. 60 ans après Belgrade, il y avait beaucoup d'événements, mondialisation, les alliances, guerre froide, domination des États-Unis. Si on va parler aujourd'hui de la cause palestinienne à 60 ans, les Palestiniens ils sont alliés, ils sont entrés dans le jeu de l'alliance. Les Palestiniens ils sont divisés, les Palestiniens sont de quelques régimes arabes. Il y a l'échec du processus de paix. Mais jusqu'à maintenant, la Palestine n'a pas été créée, n'est pas un État palestinien. Il y a la poursuite des agressions israéliennes et de la colonisation sur le terrain. Il y a le plan d'annexion israélien. Et la cause palestinienne abandonnée par beaucoup de pays, y compris les pays de ce mouvement à l'époque. Donc, on peut dire que 60 ans après Belgrade, donc ce mouvement est aujourd'hui, il n'a pas réalisé donc les espérances.
Well, many many countries are still against Palestine and against the liberation of Palestine, and nothing much has been achieved, despite the fact that the non-aligned movement is a positive movement in favor of Palestine. But there are many divisions, even among Palestinians and among the Arab countries. And I believe I will add that the Arab League has been a negative factor because of differences in Arab positions. And I would like to add, from my point of view, how come a country like Saudi Arabia, who is aligned with the United States and who is receiving the greatest number of arms from the United States, is still part of the non-aligned movement and doing a lot of, there's a lot of, even since Abdel Nasser was an Arab leader, from the beginning, he had problems with Saudi Arabia because Saudi Arabia was with the United States. And anyway, Ziad, tu continues?
Donc, merci beaucoup parce que Noha a parlé d'un point très important, ça veut dire que les Israéliens et leurs alliés américains, ils ont essayé de diviser ce mouvement parce que ce mouvement était un grand soutien à la cause palestinienne. Et l'exemple qu'a donné Noha, c'est un exemple magnifique, comment l'Arabie Saoudite, l'allié d'Israël et des États-Unis, ils ont essayé, parce qu'ils étaient contre Nasser, ils ont essayé de diviser. Donc, il y avait beaucoup de pression sur des pays africains, des pays asiatiques, des pays d'Amérique latine par la pression américaine, par les sanctions, pour abandonner la cause palestinienne.
Donc, he says that it's true that countries like Saudi Arabia are allied with the United States, like Israel. Now, I mean, there is now a new alliance also in the area between Israel and some Gulf states. They are trying to normalize, make of Israel a normal state in the region, whereas it is an occupying state. It is a state which is built on the misery of another people. And on, so I don't know, I think that the non-aligned movement, I think Ziad would agree, should take a stronger position vis-a-vis countries which are so much allied to the United States, to the United States. Of course, now the question, I can give my opinion. Je peux donner une idée, mon analyse.
Yes.
Unless tu as quelque chose d'autre à dire, hein?
C'est la conclusion, après je peux parler. Donc rapidement, il y a une minute seulement que je vais conclure. Donc actuellement, qu'est-ce qu'il reste de ce mouvement? C'est l'histoire, c'est la vérité, c'est la nostalgie à une époque où tout le monde rêvait de la paix, de la justice et de la liberté et contre l'occupation. Et on a tous rêvé, parce que moi, je suis né en 66, je suis né donc, dans cette époque, et toujours quand il y avait des réunions de mouvement, donc il y avait un espoir, donc ça, on peut dire ça. C'est pour cela maintenant, avec la mondialisation, avec le changement, avec l'alliance,
voilà.
il y a beaucoup de défis avec l'évolution. Donc pour la Palestine, le soutien est toujours là, mais c'est plutôt par pays, pas par mouvement. Et les relations, les États-Unis, ils ont dominé. Et Israël a infiltré beaucoup de pays, y compris des pays arabes. Il y a des pays de tous les pays contre la Palestine partout, en Amérique. Et toujours un soutien pour la justice. La Palestine, conclusion, la Palestine, depuis la direction palestinienne, devrait changer sa stratégie offensive militaire. Et je pense que la montée de l'Asie, c'est le thème de notre colloque, est une chance, est une opportunité et des perspectives pour la cause palestinienne. Merci beaucoup pour votre attention.
Merci Ziad.
Pour la traduction.
Merci.
Ziad
says, il va faire la traduction et l'analyse. Merci.
Ziad says that he is from a generation that had many hopes and many dreams. He is born in 1966. He is from Gaza, which has always been always been at war, you know, and occupation.
Occupied.
And he had dreams as a generation which was, you know, saw the light almost in the apogee of this movement of non-alignment and dreams of liberation, which are now not functioning because of the globalization. And I would like to add, of course, that I'm from a different generation, from Ziad, and so also generations look at things in a different way. And I think that the world, and I think he mentioned it also, now the world has changed. I don't think it's a question of Cold War and after Cold War. It's also a question of entering into a new century. The 20th century was called the American century, and the 21st century is called, even in American journals, the Chinese century. And so, as he said, we are in a conference about the rise of Asia, which is an important opportunity maybe for Palestine. And I would like to add that in the first Bandung conference and the second conference we had with Darwish, we agreed that the only problem, colonial problem, which has not been resolved in the world is the Palestinian problem. Whereas we are in the post-colonial situation in most countries of the third world, Palestine is still in the colonial, living like in the colonial era, because its lands are colonized, its people are colonized. Anyway, that's the global idea, that we are in a new phase where we hope that the rise of Asia will change things for Palestine. I don't know where he went. Where is Ziad?
I don't know, but it's a very.
I think he has finished it. Yeah.
He has finished.
Huh?
He has finished.
Yeah,
he
but
has
he
finished,
should
but
wait,
no, he has to wait for the discussion. Anyway, we have very short time.
Yeah.
I asked some extra time to finish at 5:30. So now I ask Darwisa to extend our time anyway. So I invite now Professor Mohaghegh to speak, and then at the end, Mrs. Siriwardhane about Sri Lanka. Okay, so thank you very much, Ziad. We'll ask questions, and we have a discussion later on all together with all the speakers. Thank you very much, Ziad, for your presentation.
No problem. Thanks. Thanks, Noha, for the
Professor Marzia?
Yes.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Ali Mohaghegh, and I'm from Iran. So good evening to everybody.
Good evening. You have about 15 minutes.
Okay. I will try to. Thank you.
You are from Iran?
Yes, I'm from Iran.
From Iran. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm thankful to organizers. Thanks to Professor Marzia, Casolari, and Professor Nisar Ul-Haq. My colleagues did review the history of NAM, so I will do not repeat it. So when we talk about NAM, we are talking about a mission, a structure, and a player. So the mission of non-alignment is to try to create more fair arrangements in the international community, like the Palestine case. My colleague, Professor Ziad, talked about it. So the way to achieve this goal is to confront with unilateralism and strive for multilateralism. The structure, it seems that the movement should strengthen its structure and adapt itself to the new conditions. I mean, after Cold War, when the international order is in transition. And now as a player, you know, it seems that non-alignment means that the world should not be ruled by big powers, and that international order should not be based on agreement between world powers. So joining the NAM at the beginning, I think, was an option for countries, for developing countries, but now it's a necessity, because I think in bipolar space, there was more room for maneuver for independent countries. But in the unipolar system, the space will be much more limited. So strengthening the non-alignment and countering unipolar system now is a necessity. Here I should add that multipolarity without multilateralism, it can be dangerous. So non-alignment movement faces a threat, a challenge, and a problem. What is threat? The threat is the efforts to establish hegemony and unipolar system. So the threat must be confronted. The challenge is divergence between members and incoherence. The challenge must be answered. And the problem, what is the problem? The problem is lack of executive guarantee for decisions and statements. In other words, there is incompatibility of ends and means, and the problem must be resolved. In my point of view, you know, NAM should also concentrate on participating in establishing international norms, participate more actively in conflict resolution and peacemaking, especially between the members of the non-alignment movement. About Iran, I should mention three historical points in our recent history. The first point is Iran adopted a policy of neutrality during World War I and World War II, which did not work, and Iran was occupied during the two wars by the Allies. In World War II, Iran was called the bridge to victory. But after the war, Iran was ignored, and the occupying countries, they didn't, pay enough attention, lots of damages to the country, and there is many books about that issue. The second policy I want to mention was when Iran decided after World War II, decided to be an ally of the Western powers during the Cold War. And Iran was a part of Baghdad Pact, which was later renamed as CENTO, as my Pakistani colleague mentioned it. So Iran was a follower of United States in that period. That was at the same time one of the reasons for the Islamic Revolution in 1979. So while Iran's neutrality was not respected, and to be allying with the Western powers in the form of CENTO meant lack of independency in foreign policy. After the revolution in 1979, Iran adopted a policy of non-alignment. As I mentioned, due to membership in Baghdad Pact and CENTO, Iran was not able to attend the Non-Alignment Movement Summit in 1961 in Belgrade. But after the revolution, we adopted the policy of neither East nor West. So Iran was accepted as the 88th member country at the 6th summit in Havana. And since then, Iran has been present actively in, various meetings of the movement. The movement as a group that includes about 2/3 of the members of the United Nations is an undeniable part of the solution to the challenges of today's world. The basic principles and goals of non-aligned movement are designed and regulated in such a way that is recognized as basic standards for all countries, so that adhering to it guarantees the independency, territorial integrity, and sovereignty of countries, and promotes national interest and peace. But here I should add that these principles and norms are increasingly challenged by, United States and allies. Non-alignment, as some other colleagues mentioned, is a voice. By non-alignment movement, the voice of countries that do not have a voice in international arena can be heard, like Palestinian voice. I think the occupation of Palestine is the main problem in the Middle East, or maybe in Asia. According to Ahmad Sukarno, one of the founders of the movement, the basis for formation of non-aligned movement is not geographical or racial or religious unity, but the common need. And what is the common need? Non-aligned countries, despite their diversity and differences, share the need for multilateralism. Multilateralism will be the most practical and operational arena for NAM. I can mention here the efforts of non-aligned movement to end the Iran-Iraq war. And they supported the implementation of Security Council Resolution 598 to end this war. And also condemnation of the US attack on Iranian airliner in July 1988, in which 290 civilians were killed. And also the Iranian nuclear issue they supported. The resolute support of non-aligned countries to Iranian peaceful nuclear program, as well as the support for these negotiations which led to JCPOA, has played an effective role in defending the legitimate rights of Iran and developing countries in peaceful nuclear technology. In fact, Iran is a leader in guaranteeing the nuclear rights of non-aligned countries. The benefits of recognizing and realizing nuclear rights are not limited to Iran, but the resistance of the Iranian people to these pressures prevents the creation of a dangerous procedure in the international arena to deprive other nations to their fundamental and legitimate rights in the field of peaceful nuclear activities. Iran, by realizing dangers of terrorist and extremist groups, at the 68th session of United Nations General Assembly proposed a war-free violence and extremism, which led to adoption of 2 resolutions in the United Nations General Assembly in 2013 and 2015. And this issue was also emphasized at the 7th NAM summit in Venezuela.
Ali, I ask you to speak 2 more minutes just to give the time.
So, okay, so let me select, okay.
Sorry, but we are in a very shortage of time.
Okay.
Okay.
We are in a very tight position. Yeah.
Yeah, we are in a very tight position. I asked to extend our session until 5:30, 5:45.
Okay,
Just
so
to have, yeah.
as a conclusion,
yeah.
The center world is changing. So the center of production and economy is moving from west to, namely to Asia. The general trend is that Asia is increasing the number of emerging powers on the international stage, while Europe has almost lost its political international system. The United States also became isolated under Trump. Let me here refer to U.S. National Security Strategy document published in December 2017. This document has an offensive approach and refers to some countries as threats to United States world influence. So accordingly, NAM is not a desirable entity for US policy. And the finally, I should say that non-aligned movement must pay attention to US efforts to contain emerging powers, especially emerging powers in Asia. I stop here and thank you.
Thank you very much. Noha, where is Ziad?
I don't know.
I have an idea. I hope he will appear again because I wanted to ask also some questions, a couple of questions to him. Anyway, so Irasha is.
I don't know where is Ziad.
Mr. Siriwardhane.
Where is Ziad?
I don't know where is he.
Yeah. Siriwardhane, yeah, from Sri Lanka.
Isha Siriwardhane from Sri Lanka, yes. Hi.
Is she there? Yeah.
Ah, she's there.
Yeah. So give your presentation and take 15 minutes, please.
Hi. Can you all hear me? Hi.
Yeah, we are hearing you. Yeah. Yeah, Siriwardhane, are you there? Please keep on your microphone.
Yeah. Have a good day, everyone, and thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Please take 15 minutes for your presentation.
Yeah. Okay.
And try to wind up soon because time is limited.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I think that you all know about Mrs. Bandaranayake or Mrs. Sirimawa Bandaranayake from Sri Lanka, who was first ever female prime minister.
Yes.
And I'm really honored to represent my country, being a lady. Continuing that legacy, so I would like to sum up this session about the relationship between the NAM and Sri Lanka towards in 4 focal points. First of all, why did Sri Lanka join the NAM? And what are the advantages of joining NAM? And how did Sri Lanka achieve its national interests through joining the NAM, and contribution of Sri Lanka towards NAM? and future perspectives of Sri Lanka about NAM, or the foreign policy towards NAM. So
you have introduced your Prime
from,
Minister, but you have not introduced yourself.
Sorry, hello? Yeah,
Can you introduce
I'm
yourself? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Irasha.
Yeah.
I'm Irasha Siriwardhane from Sri Lanka.
Yes.
No, what are you doing? You are teaching somewhere or what?
No, actually, I'm an attorney at law
Okay.
of the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka, and a researcher. And yeah, my major is on like in law and diplomacy as well as international relations.
Great. Now,
yeah.
Hello.
please give your presentation. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you
So
don't give
I
your
will start
presentation,
from a statement. Sorry.
you go ahead, please.
You continue, carry on.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So I will start with the statement that was made by Mrs. Bandaranaike at the Belgrade conference. Basically, it is our endeavor should be to influence world opinion to such extent that governments, however powerful, cannot regard warfare as an alternative to negotiations. So, in a speech given to the Senate of Sri Lanka by her or Mrs. Bandaranaike in 1964, outlined the goals of NAM and clarified Sri Lanka's perspectives about NAM. It's like this, and underlying the policy of non-alignment is the belief that independent nations, although small and militarily weak, have a positive role to play in the world today. So I think, first of all, I will talk about why did Sri Lanka join the NAM. So it was a founding member of NAM, and Sri Lanka was a colony of the United Kingdom until 1948, and we had constitutional ties with the United Kingdom until 1972. So our nominal head or the nominal executive was the Queen Elizabeth II of United Kingdom. Until 1972, it was really difficult to get adhered to different perspective like NAM being deviated from the Western bloc or Western origins or the Western ideological impacts. So, but Mrs. Bandaranaike and her husband, Mr. S.W.R.D. Bandaranaike, was the former Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. And both of them have embarked upon a foreign policy that was really inspired by this non-alignment policies. So they initially recognized that Sri Lanka can benefit from this NAM or national non-alignment movement. And you know that there was a Cold War until 1991 in the world. So if we stick to one particular power block, we can't, as a developing nation, we can't build enduring ties with the different nations of the world. So it is really important to understand this point. And she has extended her foreign policy towards extraordinary level, towards an extraordinary level. And for the development purposes, we have developed the ties with China, India, USA, and many different countries, not only the Western Bloc and not the Socialist Bloc, and also the not just the non-aligned countries. So for the regional cooperation, it is really important to join some organization or a movement like NAM as a developing nation. And on the other hand, it is a mean of national defense strategy. So, and as a regional body or the set of countries, we could embark upon common aspects to reduce the gap between the developing countries and the developed countries. And those are some of the key factors that Sri Lanka thought of joining the NAM. And Indian Ocean is a strategy, is really a strategically important place and a region to all the nations. Even the superpowers were fighting to acquire or spread their power in this region to gain their personal or national perspectives. So there was a competition on that side. So this regional or maybe the non-alignment or the non-aligned movement helped to rise as a single bunch of countries to defeat such pressures and threats that we had to go through as a developing nation. So it helped to intervene in the international conflicts like this Indo-China war. And so Sri Lanka was like gained a reputation through that. So it was really an achievement for us. And the Mrs. Bandaranaike's name is still remarkable in that field and in diplomatic arena. So I think so we had some national interest like that in order to like that. So I will move to the second phase. And sorry?
No, there was a disturbance, an interference from Mrs. Khalaf. You can go ahead.
You continue, yeah.
So we could achieve some economic goals and development goals, like in respect to the national interests of Sri Lanka. We got economic aids from China. For an example, the BMICH or the Bandaranaike Memorial International Conference Hall was a donation of the Chinese government by Zhou Enlai, and the Supreme Court complex of Sri Lanka was a donation of the Chinese government. And we could build strong diplomatic ties with the international actors, and the international we could enter into the international agreements, pacts in which were favoring the Sri Lankan international national interests. And we could solve some internal issues like the citizenship issue with India. So I don't have time to explain it in detail, but yeah, you may know about the citizenship issue of Sri Lanka, and the Kachati Island issue, or the maritime boundary issues were there. And we could settle those internal problems through these NAM relationships. So and we could play a mediator role in China and Indian war, China versus Indian war in 1962, and the regional diplomacy was really appreciated at that time, and we could enhance those ties with the other regions, our states, and internationally, Mrs. Bandaranaike was well known as the Prime Minister, as a Prime Minister and a Minister of External Affairs. So I will move to the next one, like the contribution of Sri Lanka towards NAM. As I mentioned before, it is a founder member, the NAM, and Mrs. Bandaranaike was a vigorously active member. And for decades, we could continue that legacy with regard to the NAM policies, and we could host the 5th NAM summit in Colombo, we could host the Colombo conference as well. That was the conference that which was held before the Sino-Indian War negotiations, and Sri Lanka played that internationally played a mediator role as well. So it has triggered our foreign policy for many more years to come, and still today we are adhered to the policies of non-alignment, like to benefit from the multipolarism and the multilateralism as a developing nation. And at that time, Mrs. Bandaranaike could present the outcome document of that summit of the Colombo conference as well. So then she proposed a zone of peace in the Indian Ocean, and it sustained as the resolution 2832 of the United Nations General Assembly. And yeah, we could sustain that aspect of declaring Indian Ocean as a nuclear weapon free zone. And we had some neutralized policies implemented in the war between Malaysia and Indonesia. So the fighters asked for some refueling facilities, but Mrs. Bandaranaike at that time refused to give those facilities because of that neutralization policy and the principles that they were adopting with reference to this non-aligned movement. So those are the contributions of contribution of Sri Lanka towards that NAM policies. And when we are talking about the future aspects or the perspectives about this NAM in reference to the Sri Lankan ideology or the Sri Lankan beliefs, it has still the impacts on our foreign policy. The non-aligned movement or the non-alignment has still impacted upon that, and that was irresistible and inevitable in our foreign policy. So multilateralism is also a modern or a possibility or a situation that we can witness in the international politics. So in that, this power block scenarios or the non-alignment in a realistic manner, it is really impractical maybe sometimes. So the downfall of the bipolar system, or there's no longer a superior of this world. So I think that the non-alignment has still an influential role to play in our foreign policy in that aspect. So I think we are having the ties with China, India, and the Western countries as well. So especially we are connected to the OBOR initiative of China, in infrastructure development and other economic perspectives. So Hambantota Port, Norachole Coal Plant, Port City project, and the expansion of Colombo Harbour are some of the projects that we are.
I'm afraid that you should stop in
just
2 minutes, 1 or 2 minutes, because we have to. We are already very late, and there must be also some questions.
Okay. So those are some of the projects that we are implementing with China, and even with the Western countries, we are having the ties and the relationships. And in that aspect, USSR, China, Yugoslavia, UK, USA, Italy, Japan, and India are having some agreements with us. And in the export sector, China, India, Pakistan, Burma, Japan, Africa, and Egypt are some of the countries that we are having our relationships with. So I think non-alignment will be impacting our foreign policy for many more years to come. So I think so that is the, in a nutshell, that is my conclusion with regard to the NAM perspective of Sri Lanka, or perspective of Sri Lanka with regard to NAM. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. So much good.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I open the
floor for discussion.
For discussion, yes, for questions.
And brief, very brief.
Yeah, brief, yeah. The problem is that I wanted to ask a couple of questions to Ziad, but he's not there. Noha, do you have an idea about where is he?
Ziad is?
Ziad, where is he?
I don't know where he is.
Because I just wrote an email to him, and he says that he went out. I don't know why. And then he's asking to enter again anyway.
Anyway, if you have any questions on Palestine, we can. Yeah. I don't know if you still have time for comments.
Yeah. Are there any other questions from the participants? There are very few participants now because it's very late. No, I had a couple of questions like. Ziad spoke about realignment within the NAM, and you know, I mean, I just go to the point. What about? I mean, there had been some you know, major changes in Arab foreign policies in the last. Okay, Ziad, question for you. What about the realignment within the NAM towards Israel? I'm not talking about the Arab monarchies that we all know about, you know, I mean, what are the Arab monarchies? But I'm talking about, for instance, Morocco, who recognized Israel. No, Morocco is a non-aligned country, and it recognized Israel. How do you perceive or explain these changes in attitudes of the, okay, Syria is not there anymore, Iraq is not there anymore. So there are, I mean, there have been very important changes in the Arab world, but how would you explain it? And I have another small question that doesn't have anything to do, at least directly, with the NAM, but I'm talking about the recent decision of the International Court in The Hague to recognize Palestine request to the recognition of Israel crimes of war in Palestine. What do you think about this decision about the International Penal Court in The Hague?
Si j'ai bien compris, Noha, tu me diras. Première question sur la normalisation du Maroc avec Israël, et pourtant le Maroc, c'est un pays de nos alliés, c'est ça?
Oui, mais il faut leur rappeler que ça a commencé avec l'Égypte. Oui.
Voilà. Et deuxième chose, sur la Cour pénale internationale, c'est ça?
Oui.
Très bien.
Mais
donc,
c'est pas clair.
Merci beaucoup pour traduire.
Ça coupe un peu.
Donc, pour la question, même Marzia, pour cette question très importante. Donc, pour le Maroc, j'ai dit dans la conclusion qu'actuellement, nous, on rêve de ce mouvement qui était un grand soutien à la cause palestinienne. Et j'ai dit dans la conclusion qu'aujourd'hui, malheureusement, il y a beaucoup de changements. Il y a un jeu d'alliance, tu vois, dans la cause palestinienne. Ça veut dire qu'il y a beaucoup de pays qui ont abandonné la Palestine. Je pense ici qu'il y a 3 erreurs stratégiques. Il y a une erreur palestinienne, une erreur internationale, il y a une pression israélienne. Donc, tout cela, donc, ça, numéro 1, le Maroc,
tu as dit
une
erreur palestinienne.
C'est le dernier pays qui a normalisé ses relations avec Israël.
Exactement.
Non, je t'avoue, il y avait 3 erreurs. Erreur de la part de la direction palestinienne, la pression israélienne et américaine sur ce pays. Je peux traduire.
First of all, he says that Morocco was not the first, but the last country to normalize with Israel. It started a long time ago, and there were many errors, starting with even the Palestinian leadership error to make a false with Israel, and then Morocco was also under Israeli and American pressure. Okay.
Il faut pas oublier qu'actuellement, il y a des jeux des alliés, d'accord? Et malheureusement, la cause palestinienne, elle est un peu oubliée, abandonnée par beaucoup de pays parce qu'il y a une pression américaine, israélienne. Et on a vu avec Trump, il y a beaucoup de pression sur ces pays pour qu'ils normalisent leurs relations avec l'état d'occupation. Donc ça montre un peu que, pour cela, j'ai dit dans la conclusion, nous, on rêve de cette alliance où il y a inconditionnable à la cause palestinienne.
I know there is a big game of alliances in the region, and especially during the era of Trump, where there was pressure on many countries to normalize with the state of Israel. And so Palestine really needs a counter strategy, like one by NAM or by all the Asian countries, Iran, China, Venezuela, all the countries should make a counter alliance pro-Palestine. Because the other alliance is also, it functions also with money. There's a lot of money in the pro-Israeli alliance. I mean, it's Saudi money and Emirati money and, you know, thing.
Okay.
Pour la Cour pénale internationale, je pense que cette décision, elle était saluée. Voilà, la Cour pénale internationale, donc cette décision de la Cour pénale internationale d'être compétente dans les territoires palestiniens et compris Jérusalem pour juger les crimes israéliens, elle était saluée par les Palestiniens, mais le plus important pour nous, c'est le concret. Il y avait beaucoup de décisions. Depuis 1947, il y avait beaucoup de décisions internationales. Nous, on saluait ça parce que nous sommes pour la paix, pour la justice, mais le plus important pour nous, c'est l'application, c'est le concret. Les Palestiniens, ils souffrent de l'occupation, de l'agression, de blocus, de murs d'apartheid, mais ils ont besoin de concret, ils ont besoin de jugement, ils ont besoin d'une solution politique surtout.
On the question of the International Court of Penal Court, recently they have decided that maybe that the Palestinian territories would be under their jurisdiction, but whereas there is still the Americans are saying no and so on. But what Ziad is saying, you know, we have many international decisions taken for Palestine, but nothing has been really changing on the ground for Palestinians in the sense of ending the occupation.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions?
Ça va, c'est clair?
Yeah. Thank you
Oui,
very
je
much.
pense. J'espère. I hope. Thank you.
It was very clear. Well, actually, I could also understand French, but other, the other participants could not. So.
Yes, thank you. We got it.
Yeah, we got it. Thank you very much. Other questions from the floor? Okay.
So you can wind up, Marzia, because there is no question. Yeah.
No, well, I don't really have anything to wind up. So if you have any conclusion, you go ahead, Nisar. I think
that the paper presented in this particular session, they were very good and they were giving their own interpretation from their viewpoint. And there was a, in the last, Marzia has asked some of the question and were answered very rightly and properly. And with this, I just congratulate the paper presenter in this session and would request Marzia to please conclude the session.
Okay, so the session started this morning with some presentations on Asia, on China, Malaysia, and it's interesting because basically all the papers made a, more or less they said similar things, if I'm not wrong, that they said that a new order is required, new industrialization, new global economies, new economic approach, that colonization has not finished. Also the notion of colonization, these ideas, these issues came out from, especially from young scholars. One of them said that colonization, colonization is not just reaching the independence, but it's decolonizing in several ways, in social ways, in economic ways, and so on. So, but what I perceive is that sometimes some general principles are declared, like, especially the declarations regarding hopes of changes. Some changes are going on, as has been pointed out several times. Asia is rising. So the rise of Asia, it's a matter of fact. But there are still some, challenges to be faced. And who will face them? What will be the capacity of Asia and Afro-Asian countries and NAM to challenge these, to face these challenges that all of us are facing now? Will NAM have the capacity, to provide some alternatives? No. Then I appreciated very much in the afternoon. All the presentations were very interesting. I appreciated very much Ziad's presentation, because unlike I appreciated all of them. All of them were very very detailed and very professional, so very rich, very stimulating also. And I'm sorry that we had less time in the afternoon and the organization was a bit perhaps a bit chaotic, but anyway, I appreciated very much Ziad's presentation, because unlike other presentations that they were more or less, they were more declaration of principles than concrete perspective. I appreciated your discourse about colonization and about the fact that Palestine is still the only unsolved colonial problem, and that it's a very big issue, according to me, a very big issue that the NAM countries have to face and have to deal with. And not only the NAM countries, and the responsibility perhaps of the NAM countries is that also to stimulate the non-NAM countries, the Western countries and other countries in the world, even the US, to face the Palestinian problem and try to find a solution, but not only to Palestine. I mean, we talked even in other sessions about, there were some other issues coming out, emerging from the presentations and from the discussion. There is not only Palestine, obviously, as one of the most turning conflicts in the world. There is Kashmir, there is North and South Korea. These two countries are still divided. So there are many issues that not only the NAM countries, but the international community in general have to face and try to find practical solution and sustainable solutions too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marzia.
Thank you, Nisar.
Thank you. Yeah, we can stop and we can leave. All the best and good night.
Thank you, Marzia. Thank you, Professor Nisar.
Thank you, Professor Anwar.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
See you all, inshallah. See you all, inshallah.